This is the Active Life Podcast. Myles Usher Doyle, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much for having me, Larry.
Myles, what are the things that everyone else should know about you, that I know about you, that will make them want to start listening to you?
They should know that I've been working as a speech coach for the last 13 years and looking at some very sort of basic fundamentals that everybody used to know
Mm.
over the past, I would say, 15, 20 years have sort of fallen off the radar, what with the technological march and everything. People being encouraged to speak or to have good conversations has been swapped out for texting and WhatsApp and looking down and all that sort of thing. So I think that's a good thing to start with.
What are the consequences of speaking poorly that most people aren't considering beyond, I'm not going to get my point across?
So basic understanding is the first point, but also the encouragement of good, meaningful, deep conversations, and also taking in the world around you, absorbing personal relationships, going through the good and the bad, and actually getting to the meat of the matter, as opposed to just sort of skipping along the surface with a text saying, hello, are you okay? I'm fine, thanks. How are you? It encourages small talk to be magnified in a sort of digital landscape. And I think small talk has a great place in society, but small talk for long periods of time is just wasted talk, I think. Wasted conversation. You can't really get into the meat of the matter through that.
Seems to be a negative connotation around small talk, but you seem to find a place for it to be valuable and maybe even essential to the fabric of society here. What do you see that to be?
Yeah, I think it's a really good tool to break the back of a conversation, just to start. And especially if you're somebody who is, like quite a few of my clients who come to me are usually paralyzed with fear when it comes to not just speaking publicly, but speaking to their friends, their colleagues, whatever. So small talk is a really good use there. It's a really good introductory tool just to skip over the threshold of conversation, if you like, and that could be, well, the one over here in the UK is the weather. That's the go-to. If you're
Well, you
ever,
apologize about it first, right?
oh, of course, yes, of
Mhm.
course, everything is layered with apology all the time. If you're doing well, if everything's going swimmingly, the apology is always there. Yes, I'm so sorry. Oh, great. Yeah, oh, sorry. Even if someone bumps into you in the streets, it's automatically your fault. You
Well,
know,
do you see that as serving a similar purpose in assuaging any tension that might exist around what could happen in conversations so that you can get your foot in the door?
exactly right. So again, if I'm working with somebody who is terrified about conflictual conversation, any element of conflict that could creep in. So it could be, I could be working with a new manager, say, who's just got a promotion in their local agency or branch or store or whatever. And of course, with promotion comes responsibility. And sometimes that is saying the thing that you don't want to say to somebody or telling somebody off in the
Mm.
most, polite way or meaningful way or whatever. So that sense of apology almost takes a little bit of stuffing out the moment. And sometimes people find that very helpful. I think as a nation, that's a go-to for us anyway. But that's fine, but you can only go so far. And as you know, and I think as we all know, the best forms of debate is civilized debate when you aren't shouting. And obviously, there's a lot of shouting these days. There's been a lot of shouting for the past, I don't know, it feels like 50 years, but probably only about 10 years, there's been lots of shouting. And if I'm shouting the loudest, then that's great. But civilized conversation done in the correct way and civilized debate just produces much more meaningful results. And usually we can find a much more common ground that way and being a bit more civil with each other. So small talk is a really good introduction to a conversation. And it could be as basic as, hello, how are you? Those sort of basic salutations for a conversation. Or if someone's doing a presentation, one of the first things we always talk about, and Larry, you and I spoke about this when we first started working together. How do I start the sound? How do I start my
Yeah.
meeting? how do I start my presentation? Where do I begin? We have all been on those calls where it's, hello, right, so can you all hear me? Can you see me? Can you see my screen? Lovely,
Like I did at the
great.
beginning of this one, right?
Exactly. No, you didn't, because you've been taught very well. You didn't do that at all.
Good.
So this idea is just wasted sound and speaking for the sake of speaking, when really you just want to get to the meat of it, just jump straight in. There's nothing more glorious than starting a conversation and starting the sentence with a bang, not like a
Well,
massive, impactful bang, but just a good morning. Today we are talking about the Q3 figures from last year. There were so many good things that happened last year, but these few things I just want to pick up here. So you've already started to get the rhythm going. You started to get your character going. You started the story going because no one's got time for a meeting. Okay. Everyone's far too busy for a meeting. So if you give your audience an opportunity to sense that this is going to be a complete waste of time, you are sunk before you even started saying anything.
one of the principles on the heels of that that I've found you to uphold often is this idea of authenticity over persona, where you're being who you really are in conversation and pulling out the essence and the power of that, enhancing it, maybe crafting or honing it, as opposed to putting on this presenter persona that you
Mm.
believe the audience is going to respond well to. How does how does presenting authentically and how might we find that? How might we find it and how might presenting authentically, excuse me, serve us and our listener, as opposed to speaking in a way that we think is going to be a professional or well adopted persona?
Yeah, it's a great question, Larry. And really, that's the main reason for my company, Speakwell Coaching, existing. That purely one-to-one basis is my main bread and butter, that one-to-one stance, really working with the personality. We're all blessed with voices that are completely individual to us. We might sound similar to somebody, but we won't sound exactly the same. Okay. So this sense of authenticity and making sure that, for example, when you and I first started working together, I was acutely aware that all I was interested in is hearing Larry tell the story. Larry starting the conversation. If another sort of persona tries to creep in, a corporate presenter 2.0 starts to edge their way in, that can be quite sideswiping for the speaker. And if it's sideswiping for the speaker, it's going to be sideswiping for the audience as well. And I think if we all sort of cast our minds back to when we first got into corporate life or our first couple of employment opportunities, there may have been that occasion where you were up in front of people speaking, and you can almost sense that you are not speaking in the way that you normally would. You're putting on
I
a
relate.
sort of act, like a corporate hat, and you start hitting these points that you think you have to hit because this is how corporate meetings go. You've got to hit these moments. And of course, there are moments where you have to lean into a certain sense of procedure and routine. But to get the most out of your message and your story, you've got to speak as you. And that takes a lot of getting into. I think this point about authenticity is thrown around a lot these days. It's definitely a key word that's thrown around and a very worthwhile key word to be thrown around because it means so much. But when I'm looking at it with somebody, I just have to usually stop them and say, great, that sounds fantastic. How would you start that if it was just you and me having a coffee? Would you start that sentence in that way? Could we just reshape it in a different sense and you just tell it to me straight, as it were, as opposed to putting on all the corporate jargon and the bells and whistles, which are very off-putting. And I think we're very savvy these days to pick out
Mm,
inauthenticity and an
mm.
artificial sound and an artificial persona. The days of the second-hand car salesman, the oily figure, crawling into the parking lot to try and shift you a Peugeot or something, is something that we are very acute to now, and we're aware of that. So this sense of being authentic, forgive me, is really, really important. But it takes a while to get to that point to actually break it down. Speak as yourself and see what happens. And then we can build on this sense of, okay, that's good. Maybe let's look at these bits here. And once you're speaking as your rawest form as yourself, that's when I can really start to work and see, okay, right, there's something going on there. Filler words seems to be an issue, pace seems to be an issue, posture seems to be a concern. Let's have a look here. Let's get into those basic fundamentals.
In that vein, Miles, how would you help someone who identifies with their personality being more quiet or more introverted and staying authentic throughout this experience?
So what I would do with that individual, what I would say is ahead of that first session with me, I would say bring something with you that you've delivered before. This could be something you've done in your workplace. It could be a new business opportunity, a new pitch opportunity, a presentation or a project you've just done, keeping it relevant to their day to day. Relating how it's going to be authentic to them makes it easier for that client to step over that threshold and go, okay, great, I do this every day. It's not so abstract. That will then give me an opportunity to see how they start the sound, how they present the sound. If they are quite quiet and introverted and keeping lots of things back and breaking eye contact, their posture might be pretty atrocious or very insular, then we'll do a couple of exercises. I might get that person to walk around the room, for example, holding a very exaggerated bad posture and seeing what that does to their whole body language. I may film them, we may watch it back together. I will then flip that to its extreme and say, okay, stand as the highest status person you can think of. This could be a king, a president, a CEO, a bank manager, whatever. Just glide around the room as if you own the place, okay? And we'll look at what those basic fundamentals are. So we're almost looking at two major extremes, an extreme low status person and an extreme high status person. And then we'll see what we can garner from each of those columns. Is there something within that lower status setting that's worth working with? Usually there isn't a great deal there that's worth working with, because lots of the main fundamentals of a low status persona is focus down, breaking eye contact very quickly, closing off. And we might discuss what it means to adopt that position from the person you're speaking to. So if I see, and we all know this, if we see somebody in our organization or a friend or an acquaintance at a dinner party or something, and they are walking around like this and they're breaking eye contact pretty instantly, it beams out a message that almost screams, don't look at me, I'm not worth looking at. Don't speak to me, I'm not worth listening to. And that can really obviously be very off-putting for the person speaking. You might be thinking, oh my word, this person's having a terrible time. They obviously hates conversation. I need to leave them alone as quickly as possible. And suddenly a distance creeps in, which doesn't help anybody out. So then looking at those two extremes, we then look at the other column of high status and say, okay, what's going on here? This is, look at me, I'm worth looking at. Listen to me, I'm worth listening to. This is it's a real challenge for that person we're talking about here, Cody, that person, that girl or that boy who are terrified about pushing themselves forward. And I think even from people who are fairly confident, standing in front of a room in a very vulnerable position, very exposed, is a challenge. It's you think, oh my word, anything could happen. But that's the joy of live presenting. That's why we love going to live sporting events and live theatre or ballet or whatever, to see something live or see one of our favorite bands play a gig, because anything can happen. There's this raw state of entertainment. And even when we're speaking to our colleagues, we can't control if one of our colleagues is going to drop their pen on the floor or their laptop's going to fall on the floor or someone's going to come in late. So we can't control that, but we can control how we feel and what it feels to beam out a slightly higher status than we usually are. Because sometimes even if you are really concerned or nervous deep down, if you can appear to look as though you are gliding through the day and you are owning every single space you walk into, you sometimes fool yourself. And that inner person screaming suddenly goes, actually, this isn't too bad. Or, oh, actually, this is the place to be. Good stuff happens from here. Nothing great happens from here.
I appreciate you bringing that up because when you were describing the sense of introversion and I'm not worth looking at or
Hmm.
I'm not worth listening to, I was thinking about how many people might have, and I've experienced this on my own, a sense of deservedness issue
Hmm.
around being seen or listened to. And that might be rooted in places of shame or guilt or what have you. Amy Cuddy did a TED talk maybe 10 years ago where she described how it's obvious when someone feeling bad reflects in their body language. Feeling bad about yourself obviously reflects in your body language. The kid walking down the hallway, slumped over and not wanting to make eye contact, everyone can bet how that person feels. Amy did a study where she wanted to evaluate exactly what you were describing, which was, is this a two-way street? And can we hijack the way that we feel based on taking conscious control over our body language first? One of the questions that I have for you is, have you found, Myles, that there is a connection between improving the way we speak and feel when we speak and our general sense of confidence and even mental health?
Yeah. Oh, 100%. And I suppose the best example I can use is myself in that regard and what was my vision to set up Speakwell all those years ago. What was the sort of main catalyst for me to do that? I was a very shy schoolboy. I was very shy. I was very timid. I wouldn't dare say boo to a goose, as they say. I wouldn't ever put my head above the parapet. Okay. I would just think, I'm not worth listening to. And we probably haven't got time to delve into what those things were to make me feel that way. But the main piece of feedback I had when I was about 9 or 10 was when my parents went to a parents' evening, and one of my tutors said to my parents, "We sometimes forget that Myles is in the class." And that kicked me like a mule, that piece of feedback. And that has stayed with me forever. And I remember thinking, even when I was thinking about setting up Speakwell, I kept thinking, no, I do have a voice. I want my voice to come across. I want Myles to come across. Okay. I think on a certain odd day, I'm a pretty interesting chap. So I want people to see this. Okay. This natural sense of understatement creeping in at that schoolboy age. Yeah. So this sense, but I knew I wanted to push that forward. I thought, no, do you know what? I do have something to say. I do have something to say. And I use that to when I'm working with clients of any level. Okay, that could be somebody who is the best speaker in the world who just wants to hone in on what they've got, or somebody who's incredibly nervous and they want to speak. My main reason to do what I do is to find that voice with that person, help them find their voice, help them find their storytelling persona, help them find the rhythm they need to tell this story. So I understand firsthand what it feels like to do that. And I think we're probably all fairly shy as school children or, as children and finding our way and working our way in the world. And that's to do with our sort of family dynamic, our upbringing, what happened there, the age of your parents, that sort of thing. I was the youngest. My brother is 10 years older than me. So I was very much a surprise, shall we say, when I crept along. So my parents are of a generation that was usually the generation above my peers in my classroom. So lots of the references fizzing around the family home wouldn't quite gel with what was going on in the playground, if you like. And, inadvertently, that's where my love for like jazz and classic cinema and everything came from, because that was what my father enjoyed and my mother enjoyed. So I just took that with me, really. But even then, I was sort of sapping up watching Casablanca, say, and thinking, okay, wow, people don't speak like that anymore.
So you
What's
found that in
happened?
general, this pursuit of more skillful and empowered speech has improved the way that you see and think and feel about yourself.
Exactly. Oh, very much so. I know that, take an example, you wake up in the morning and you've had a rubbish night's sleep. You've got so much to do. You are so weighed down with the weight of jobs that need doing in that week. Okay. I know if I do my non-negotiable walk as soon as I wake up, and I am bringing this understanding of what my posture should be, and bringing in an understanding of what I need to do, and just sort of getting rid of any negative energy through that walk in the morning, getting some daylight or, a wash of rain in my face as it normally is over here, and just stepping out and going, it's okay. I can do it. It's not as bad as I first thought. So again, they're mixing that into an understanding of telling my story, telling my message, acquainting myself with my voice, or reacquainting myself with my voice just makes me feel so much better. I can own the world, okay? And we all can from that point in the morning. Those non-negotiables, seizing the day, finding some achievement before you've even left the house, like, making the bed, that sort of thing, all the sort of Jordan Peterson elements that really help in that regard. So yes, my mental health has improved dramatically. And I would always then put my hand up and say, no, actually, I will read this poem in front of the class, or I will do this opportunity, and just to do this stuff. And as we all know, keep the reps up and do it, it becomes second nature. And you say yes more than just sitting on your hands and putting yourself up there and say, no, actually, I have got something to say.
You described some differences in expectations that people have of us now that we're living in a more digitalized world, and how this has become a generation lost to having their faces buried in a phone or a screen instead of small talk in person outside the bakery or whatever it is.
Yeah, yeah.
What are what are some of the ways that people that are, for better or for worse, now forced to do their presenting digitally can maintain some sort of unfair advantage because they're paying attention to the key elements that will make them successful in ways that other people might not be paying attention to? What are some of those elements we are now forced to pay more attention to?
Yeah, so definitely focus. I think when we're on a screen, like we're speaking virtually now, okay, I know that if I look at my face here, I'm not going to be looking at you, Larry. So, okay, that sort of alienates you. Then my sound is going to go here. So it's going to look slightly odd. Or if I look at Cody down there in that little box there saying hello, again, I'm looking down. Or if I've got notes in front of me, looking at my notes. So focus is immensely important, more so than it was perhaps in the pre-COVID age, shall we say. Where am I looking? Who am I looking at? If we're talking about eye contact and maintaining eye contact, find that person, find that point. Is it the green dot that's there? I would usually say that's the best place to go. But then I'm acutely aware that we react to faces. So I've got Larry filling up my screen here. I'm very lucky I've got you there, so I can just look straight at you, okay? And that's really good. That's great because I can then react to what you're doing. You're nodding your head. There's a sense of agreement. You're listening. I can react to that. We react to these emotional, physical responses, okay? We understand it's an alien setup. It's very artificial in that sense. So we've got to be really acutely aware of focus. Again, body language. If I'm sat back in my chair, that's probably not too great. So I'm far away from my mic. I'm slumped down. Everything's curled up. It's a bit too relaxed. So I've got to still be in the moment, in the
So
room.
is this as simple as like putting the person on speaker view and making sure that your eyes are fixed where it's going to look like they're looking at you?
Exactly
Mm,
right. So well, the main key there is find a point and stick with it.
I see.
So if I'm looking at you, then I'm looking at you.
Uh,
If I'm dancing around trying to work out where my focus is, that becomes very jarring for the audience because they're going to be thinking is, why is Myles looking around the room? Is he looking at a text? Is he looking at an email? Is he listening to me? His phone is down there. His notebook's down there. What's going on? So, but again, we know that person if we're speaking to them in real life. There are people that do this, okay? You don't have their focus. They are looking at their phone. They are looking around the room. They're trying to see if there's anyone more interesting coming in the door. It's like going to a house party or a dinner party and the person you're speaking to is just no way listening to you. They are going, yeah, yeah, God, wow, great. Anyway, I've got it, and then, they're not engaged. It's that age-old question, Larry, and I think you and I would have spoke about this when we first started talking. how do I come, how do I be, sorry, how do I become an engaging speaker?
Mhm.
It's first and foremost engaging in your subject and engaging in the person you're speaking to.
There.
Yeah. If you think what's the epitome of charm, it's the person who you're speaking to holding up a mirror to the person that they are speaking to and asking them direct questions. Oh, wow, you did that. How old were you? Oh, gosh, wow, you did that when you were 15? That's incredible. That's really incredible. So you're almost reflecting on them what's going on. So, but you've got to find that focus. And this digital age encourages us to look here, look there, look here. Look, here comes a notification. Here comes something. Look, here's an email. Here's something else. My phone's ringing. What's going on? It makes us very distracted as people. And therefore, if your focus is all over the place, then your message is going to appear quite scrambled.
I might share a struggle that I've been working out recently. Maybe you can give me a tip. I often find that when I'm thinking or reflecting or very presently digesting something that just has been said, my I will look away. I will look out in the distance as I metabolize that or reflect on an honest, genuine, grounded answer that I want to provide. And in the past, people have mistaken that for absence. What are some ways that I can ensure that if I do have to look away so that I can be most attentive to the thought or the response of the question, that I can make sure that people know that is what was happening instead of me being distracted by the pigeons that are flying by?
It's damn pigeons. Yes, it's a good question. I would say with something like that, if you're acutely aware that you do stare off a lot, and I think breaking away to think about something to return again is absolutely fine as a visual cue, to make sure that you are ensuring that the person you're speaking to is still connected with what you're saying. You could repeat the question they've said to you or repeat the last phrase they've said to you. You often find people say, I hear what you're saying. I hear what you're saying. And what I would say to you is, because all you're doing is baking in time to condense, absorb, and process what's being said, so you can come back with a decent response.
They're clear that you're still there.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So you could pick up that last sentence they said or
Mhm.
repeat the question. Yeah, that idea. How would I go about doing that? What a great, great question. What I would do is that idea, because we know that giving ourselves room to maneuver vocally gives us time to think about a good response to go back with. Okay. And again, Larry, this is stuff that you and I would have spoke about in our very first meeting. Operating in a small space, operating in a tense space means that we are thinking very quickly. We are not giving ourselves time to react to what someone's talking to us. Our posture is going to be slightly off kilter or not fully realized. Okay. You were always very good because you always maintained a good posture, but it's just perhaps readdressing what it is to have a good untense posture. So you've got the time to think, to operate in a larger space. It's always that age-old question, am I present in the space? Have I turned up? Am I here today? Now, somebody who operates here in a very tense, small space and speaks very quickly and uses lots of ums, ahs, and filler words probably hasn't really turned up. They don't feel as though they are present. And I think we've all sat in the audience when that person has presented to us. And we know, because audiences, we're so savvy in an audience, we know if that person hasn't arrived today and they are not present. We can pick out a waste of time in a sense of a meeting very, very quickly. Yeah. And again, Larry, it's that question that we would have spoke about in our early sessions. What's the point of this presentation? What's the point of this speech? Why can't this just be an email? If you are
Yeah,
not
it's more challenging. It's more challenging than most people think.
of course. And if you're not present in the space, you are giving your audience that answer already. This should be an email. This should be an email. Why is this not an email? Why am I here? Why am I here? Those big questions. So that sensation is perhaps something you could perhaps look at. This, looking away to think about your answer is fine. But maybe just repeating the last line that the person has said to you, or just repeating the question to reinforce your answer is always going to be helpful.
Helpful.
Is that restating of the question going to be more valuable in a digital setting than in an in-person setting, or would you recommend doing that for both over silence?
I would probably recommend doing it for both I'm a big fan of silence, though, Cody. I think there is a lot of authority that can be sought from silence. Again, if we go back to that very timid person we were talking about earlier on this call, baking in some time to think, the authority of a silence. If a high status individual speaks in very short sentences, they don't repeat themselves because they don't need to. They hold that gap, that space of the conversation, which really helps for your point to land as well. If we want all of our bits of insight, our teachings, and our learnings to fall in the ears of our audience, we need to give people time to absorb this level of insight. We need to remember as speakers and as storytellers that your audience isn't blessed with your life experiences. They haven't been on your journey. So a very basic bit of insight to you will change their lives forever, that person, that one sentence they'll take away with them for the rest of the week, the day, or their lives. So if we gloss over things too quickly, because sometimes we think the more we speak, the more authoritative we become, the more intelligent we become by just keeping speaking, like a machine gun of words, verbal diarrhea, just shooting out. This sense usually plays the opposite objective or strategy that we're looking to seek. So leaning into those ideas of those basic characteristics of a high status person, speaking in short sentences, appreciating the silence, garnering the authority of that gap, not being afraid to mind the gap, leaning onto the period that you have in your sentence, using the natural grammar and punctuation that we all do when we're chatting socially. Yeah. But sometimes when we speak in a more corporate setting, we forget that.
Have you noticed, especially with the pervasiveness of social media and everyone's attention span seeming to get shorter and shorter, has there been any correlation that you've noticed between how polished a speaker should be or attempt to be on those platforms versus maybe what it was 10 years ago, 20 years ago?
Yeah, it's punchier in the sense that I think people misconstrued energy for speed. And they try and pack so much into a sentence or into a paragraph. We know that the algorithm one week might really favor a 15-second clip above a 20-second clip. So then you try to cram a novel into a sentence. And all that happens is your main motivator is, I've got to get this out in 15 seconds, as opposed to what I would say, you need to find a better motivator, which could be, why are you saying this today? Is this going to change somebody's life? Is this going to revolutionize the way they operate with their colleagues? Is this going to change the way they interact with their loved ones? Is this going to change the way they approach sound? Is this message going to, change the landscape in which we all operate in? What is the motivator? What is it? And that's a sort of early question I have in my clients, to sort of really delve into what's underneath their sentences. So we veer away from that idea of, okay, can you see my screen? Everybody all right? Lovely, great, okay, right. Today we're going to be talking about giving something a motivator, and a motivation just gives your speech direction. So yeah, I think there is a real change in the way that social media has compartmentalized and made everything very snack-like. Whereas when we're telling stories, we like substance. It's almost like comparing a bag of potato chips to a lovely roast dinner. We want the roast dinner. The crisps will be fine for about 5 minutes, but we'll still be hungry. If I've got somebody telling me a nice story, then I'm going to be pretty satisfied if it's a good one. And if it's told really well and it's told from a point of engagement. And that's why children's stories are so great. And I defy you to tell a bedtime story to your son, daughter, your niece or nephew, and you're not engaged or involved. Because otherwise it's, Once upon a time, there were three bears, and are you asleep? No, and it's alien to us. We like telling stories. We live on this stuff.
Hey, it's Dr. Sean here reminding you that if you are a coach who wants to fill the gap neglected by fitness and healthcare, and you want to make a career doing it, we might be able to help you. Head to the show notes. There's a link there. You're going to click that link to download the ALP curriculum. That's the stuff that we teach to coaches over the course of 13 months to turn them into world-class professionals who never have to worry about missing a paycheck again, doing work they love to do. Go ahead and check that out, and I'll see you on the other side. Let's get you back to the show.
I'm very eager for us to dive a little bit more into the magic of storytelling a little later.
Okay.
Here. I think there's a lot into it. One of the things that I'm very curious about is you are someone who has become adept at helping a person speak to and work with an audience. Yet, you are someone who has been very intentional and very deliberate about focusing on working with people one-on-one. Was there a client transformation or transformations that was intensely affirming to you in realizing the power of focusing one-on-one with people?
Yes, that's a great question. And again, I need to look away and think about it. It's that's a really, really good question. Most certainly in the early days, working with somebody who is very shy, so timid that the idea of them speaking in front of a room of people would just send them into a state of shock and spasm, to think, oh my word, and I know this is a point for lots of people. Yeah, glossophobia, the fear of public speaking, is a big deal. Okay, it holds everybody back. But I think, as we can all appreciate on this call, in the last 15 years, I would say that in corporate life, you just have to be a competent public speaker, and there's no two ways about it. You are called upon to speak more often than you were, even with COVID, notwithstanding the whole pandemic as well, and everything that went along with that. This sense that you have to do this stuff, you have to stand up and speak to people. Your boss is going to say, yeah, can you go up and speak about the project you did last week? You were you were the project manager, you were the account director, you were whatever, please go and tell people. So yes, in the early days, working with people who are very shy was very impactful, because I instinctively knew that shy, timid person would never sign up to do a 40-participant public speaking workshop down the road in a big hall full of loads of people, because that is not the access or the entry fee that they need to do to get into the rhythm. It's going to be too scattergun for them, or just the idea of going to a room full of 40 strangers and speaking in front of them is just going to put them off. So as a first point of access, a one-to-one bespoke experience with me going, okay, great, just, and the first thing, and Larry, you'll appreciate this, the first time I work with a client, I'll always say in that first sort of 5 seconds, great, okay, present to me. And that's the worst bit. They'll just go,
Sure was.
Okay, so today we are looking at this project, which is really good. And everything sort of crumbles down.
To your point about the nervousness that can come from speaking to one person, we've referenced a lot of speaking to massive halls. I have spoken to groups of people. I've also spent the majority of my career engaging one person intensely. And I don't see major fundamental differences in the principles that capture attention. I can see that for people listening to this who would think, well, I'm not going to ever be doing Showtime at the Apollo, there are still fundamental principles here that they have to master if your career is based on speaking to one person at a time, especially if they're paying you. Do you agree with that, or am I missing something there?
No, I think you're absolutely right. It's not, and I always try and push this point. I say, you work with me, well, okay, we're going to look at your A game, which is your corporate speech, shall we say, that the way you operate at work. But I always say you'll be foolhardy to think if your B game isn't going to start to improve as we do this as well. Again, it's similar. You go to the gym floor, you do deadlifts and stuff with the bar. Okay, you're probably going to be walking better with a much more open posture the next week after doing a couple of reps because you recognize that, oh, okay, yeah, look, this forces my focus up if I'm up here. Okay, this feels good to operate from here at this point here. So the transition from the A game voice to the social voice is, yeah,
Carry
it's
over.
just indicative. It just has to, because otherwise to go against that is to play the Larry corporate presenter 2.0 card.
The persona thing that we were
Yeah,
talking about.
but really, it's got to be Larry or
Mm.
Cody. Sorry, Cody, I don't mean to miss you out. But it's got to be you telling the story.
Mm.
So it
Have you
falls
found
back to that category.
have you found that having worked with Americans, English folk, and maybe some others, that there are differences in anxieties across cultures and hangups?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of sort of broad strokes, I would say. Yeah, you guys are definitely a lot more enthusiastic and wanting to learn and willing to try stuff.
So interesting.
The natural British reserve keeps people in their sort of shy, I'm not worth listening to category for a lot longer than it needs to. Not everybody, this is a very sort of broad stroke look, but that is definitely there. So that's the main difference, this sense here. The tall poppy syndrome, I know, is something that lots of people discuss. This idea that if I put myself out there, it's who's this person? Okay, all right, okay. The judgment factor is considered a lot more, I would say, this side of the pond than perhaps your side of the pond.
Interesting.
Again, broad strokes, but
Mm.
in my sort of experience of working with a lot of Americans, and it's ironic actually that over the past 4 or 5 years, my client base is mainly in the US.
Interesting.
No.
So there's a higher baseline of gregariousness and eagerness to be a little more extroverted and seen, as opposed to let's avoid being the nail that stands up lest we become hammered down.
Exactly right. Exactly right. So, and the point I will try to push across to any clients is, listen to me. I've got something wonderful to tell you. That's almost the subtext that we might look at from a starting point. So just to thrust them forward. You're going to be speaking on stage. There's an element of the performative about it. It's got to get over that. And sort of working
Stage.
with me and using me as a sounding board, I can help them step into the spotlight as opposed to shoving them on stage like a stage mother. Yeah. So it's that idea.
Can the stage be considered, back to the previous question, can a stage be considered a literal stage in front of thousands of people, as well as the, for 2-3 square meters where you and one other person are going to be having an intensely intimate and important conversation?
Yeah, exactly the same. Obviously, the vocal effort is slightly different for a room of 5,000 to a room
Sure.
of 2, but the main fundamentals are there. This sense of where's my focus? Can I be heard? Am I using a decent amount of my vocabulary? Am I leaning into filler words? Am I speaking too quickly? Where am I looking? How am I sitting? Am I engaged? All these basic things fall into whether it's a one-on-one or you in front of, a packed house at Carnegie Hall. It's exactly that idea.
You talked a lot about the art and the science of storytelling as a juicy, meaty roast dinner that everyone gets to enjoy instead of a bag of crisps.
Yeah.
Has there been, as you have navigated your own theater background and your own anxieties and your own introversion in the past, has there been a speech or speeches or speaker or speakers that have profoundly influenced you?
Yeah, it's a fine question, Larry, and lots of influences. Now, again, I lean back into my interests and passionate interests in classic cinema, where the pacing is usually a lot slower than we're used to nowadays. So the construction of a script, the construction of a conversation, one camera on one person, minimal cuts, those sorts of elements. That could be an American movie, that could be a British film. So yeah, I've always got one foot in the past. People sometimes refer to me as a bit of an old soul over here, and I wear that with pride, actually. I like being an old soul. I like appreciating stuff that's been and recognizing that that has borne the stitches of where we are now, and we are part of something else that's going to go on further. So that's very important. So with that, we can look at speeches of Churchill, for example. Martin Luther King is always a fantastic one to jump to. And those elements of what they did to get into a speech and what the practice they would put into that as well, the prep they would do, the hours they would spend of writing, rewriting, walking around the bedroom, reading it out loud, shooting down bad ideas because they're vocalizing them early. And with lots of other, classic film stars and things and elements of film, there's a lovely speech in the Hitchcock film, The 39 Steps. Robert Donat, the actor, plays Richard Hannay. And there's a speech he does halfway through the film where he's on the run for a murder he didn't commit. He's a man on the run. Okay, classic sort of Hitchcock format, but really lovely. The odd man in, as it were. He stumbles into a hall after being chased by some agents. And this hall is set up for a political speech. And he just runs in just to get out of the way. And it's that classic, somebody turns around, oh, you're here at last, great, please come in, we worried something had happened to you. And he just goes along with it. And they think he is the member of parliament or the candidate to address this room of eager partygoers, okay? And he stumbles up to the front and he has to give a speech. And as he's sort of stumbling through this speech, he sees the two agents come into the back of the hall. And suddenly his rage of what's happened, his anger and his frustration, his tiredness of being chased across, Scotland and up and down the country on steam trains and for something he didn't do, he pushes out this amazing speech about how we should treat each other, how we should live our lives, how we should go about it. This is the world I want to live in. And of course, this very somber party conference, if you like, just suddenly erupts into applause and turns into something magnificent. And he's got such a beautiful way of speaking, Robert Donat. Fine actor, amazing actor. Yeah, the original 39 Steps, definitely worth a watch for that moment alone. And of course, everything is beautifully clipped as, acting was in those days, but also the way people operated and spoke in those days. This lovely clipped accents where finishing their words and this lovely sense of dynamics and rise and fall and no fat in a sentence. Everything had its worth. So that was always a good go-to for me, that particular speech.
There are two things about this conversation that stick out to me. There's a what, as in the words that we're using in the story that we're telling. There's also a how, as in how we're inflecting, how we're taking our pauses, how we're presenting the information in the story. If somebody's listening to this and they're trying to get started, where would you point them? Would you point them to craft your story, come up with the story that you want to tell, and then work on the how, or simply start working on how you're presenting and backfill in stories as you go?
That's a great question, Cody. What I would do is, let's use the example of a nervous groomsman, and they are getting married in 3 months' time, and they are putting their speech together. Okay, that's always a good one. I've worked with lots of very nervous best men and groomsmen, even brides doing speeches as well. And I always say to them, get your ideas down on paper quickly. Think about what you want to say, but don't write it out like a script. Just put down some notes, just some points, some prompts. Once you've written down 2 prompts, speak that out loud into an empty room, whether you in your bedroom, in your dining room, in the car, whatever. Just speak it out loud. Once that person has done that exercise and vocalize those ideas into the ether, they've done two things. One, they've broken the back of the idea that they are giving a speech. Most people going into a wedding speech or even a corporate speech won't rehearse, because to rehearse is to admit to them the fact they are going to be presenting in 2 days' time. So they would rather read it through in their head, and we all sound like Churchill and Martin Luther King in our heads. Trust me, we all do, okay? I sit there and, regale a shopping list or a laundry list and think, wow, this sounds amazing. And then you go and do it and it falls flat as a pancake, You stand up there. So they're admitting themselves to that fact. Secondly, they're vocalizing these thoughts and ideas. They can then start to shoot down bad ideas a lot earlier than they would normally. And I think we've all had that. If we've ever prepped for a speech and we've spoken out loud and gone, oh God, did I write that? I would never say that. I would never start a sentence with that. Why on earth did I pick that? We are our own best self-editors, okay? We can shoot down bad ideas a lot earlier, so therefore not wasting time. There's a third point as well. The more that we're speaking this stuff out loud and vocalizing it, it's sticking in our heads a lot swifter. We are getting used to it. It's the reps, okay? Keeping the reps up. Not rehearsing something to death like it's parrot fashion. It's not a memory test, but we are pushing ourselves in that direction where our words are starting to stick together. We're starting to get the gist of the story. So if we then on the day disappear or deviate away from the story path, we know the overarching idea, and that's much easier for us to get back onto an even keel from that point there. Does that answer your question, Cody? I sort of packaged it as a wedding speech. I think that's always a good one to picture it, because people giving wedding speeches are usually people who wouldn't normally do public speaking engagements. But the other ironic thing about a wedding speech, if we could just dwell on this final point, if I may, the stakes are never as high when you're doing a wedding speech. It's usually the biggest speech you're ever going to give, ever, ever. When do we ever get the opportunity to extol the wonder and loveliness of the person that we truly love to a room with the people who we truly love, who are all on our side? We seldom get those opportunities. I would say the only other time you get the opportunity is when it's too late and you're doing a eulogy at someone's funeral. So the stakes are high. So doing wedding speeches and prepping them in the correct way, you just have to do it. You do yourself a disservice if you're not thinking about it in that particular reverential way. The majesty of a wedding speech, or giving a reading at a wedding or whatever, anything stitched into the realms of ceremony needs to be given the time and the respect it deserves.
Oh, Myles, if I gather correctly, it's let's do what is the appropriate service to make sure we have written down what deserves to be said, no more than needs to be there. And in the process of that editing, make sure that we understand how to deliver this in a way that feels authentic to us, powerful to us, and then powerful to the listeners.
Yeah, exactly right. Exactly right. Exactly right.
You've described a couple of times how engaged people are in real, meaty, juicy story, and how easy it is for us to be there and how natural it is for us to crave it and be part of it. Are there rituals that you have or have found or advised that people use to make sure that they show up at the beginning of a story in such a way that they and the listeners will both turn up, as you described?
Yeah, so to turn up and to be present in the space, again, we ask those basic questions. Why am I doing this? What's the point? Why can't this be an email? They are usually the first go-to elements to start with, to build in a foundation. I'm not just doing this because my line manager or my boss told me to. That's a rubbish motivator. Nobody cares about that apart from you. Your audience isn't going to give a damn. Okay, they're really not. I'm here because I was told to be is a rubbish reason. So finding the motivator, finding what it could be. No, I'm telling this story because we had a terrible time doing this project. And I don't want anybody else to suffer the slings and arrows that we did when we did that presentation. This is going to change people's working lives if I push this story out there, okay? Again, it helps flip it in that way. A next development point from there, and what I do with quite a few of my clients, is look at poetry, for example, or again, children's story, a good children's story. Okay. Because usually a big barrier for somebody is to emote, is to find some expression in what they're doing. Find what the meat of the line is, what the meat of the story is, what's happening here. And again, we picked up about children's stories and how tricky it is to not emote when you're reading a good children's story, to a bedtime story to one of your children or your niece or nephew or a friend's child, whatever. It's that idea. It really forces you to emote, and children's stories force you to do that. Likewise, poetry. It's a very expressive art form. It forces you to be emotive. It's very tricky to do. Okay, first time reading a poem, a cold read, you've never read it before, it's going to be slightly going through the motions, getting your head around the words. What's the rhythm? Does it rhyme? Does it not rhyme? All these sort of things to think about. Once you've got that under your belt, you can then start to explore what those lines mean. And because it's a poem and not just a letter, it forces you to approach the line in a more performative way.
I would recommend this as a warm-up.
Yeah, exactly. So what I would, and Larry may have done this, or we may not have done, but one of the exercises, if I'm finding somebody who is struggling to either pitch the sound or to find a much more expressive way of doing the delivery, I might say to them, okay, do that line again, but do it in a very boring, monotone fashion.
I remember. It was helpful.
Yeah, great.
I remember you took me through the ends of the spectrum of be the most boring person on the planet.
That's it. You've got it.
And then be the most over the top, annoyingly in your face person on the planet.
Yeah, a ham, be a real ham. Yeah.
And then you're going to live in the middle.
Yeah, exactly. And it's funny that when you then deliver it in the middle, things are slightly elevated, but to a more Larry-like way, for example. Okay. And you go, okay, I can operate. This is a better place to operate rather than, good morning, everybody. It's really great to be here. So today, and sometimes doing the boring faction with the clients, they might just regurgitate how they delivered it normally the first time.
Sure. For sure.
So we've really got to push them to go to these two extremes in the same way that we use the polar extremes for the bad posture, for example. You know, walking around a room and not making eye contact, how does that make you feel? Walking around the room as if you own the place, how does that make you feel? Now, take some elements of that and see what happens in the middle. Live in the middle, exactly right. Live in the middle. The natural, neutral stance of where you fall is a good way to be. So poetry as a warm-up is always a good one. But also the great thing about poetry and reading a classic bedtime story or children's story, such as a Paddington story, a Just Williams story, a Roald Dahl story, for example, is you instinctively start to bolster your vocabulary. Sentence structure and the way that stories were told 30, 40, 50, 60 years ago, completely different to now. So you're going to stumble across a word you've never seen before. So therefore, some research is involved. And therefore, once you've done that, you might think, oh, okay, that word sounds interesting. I might try and use that tomorrow at work. I might use that when I go for a coffee with one of my friends.
So it just enriches your speech.
Exactly. I think, again, and going back to one of Cody's points earlier in the call about social media, we are encouraged to swim in a very shallow lexicon. We're here, okay?
Well described.
If you think about how many words there are in the English language, 500,000 English words at our disposal, yeah? I think the poor French only got 100,000, so, you know, boo for them. So we've got loads. So why paddle around in the, you know, literally, like, okay, so, when you could be using something else? You might find the most perfect word to describe what you're talking about. Start painting with your language and the vocab. And if you jump into a poem that was written 100 years ago, you're just automatically going to start to bolster your own vocabulary. And that's a fine thing to do.
Fine thing to do. I've heard the same value that you're describing related to listening to audiobooks as an adult,
Yeah,
because you're exposed to grammatically correct sentences and you get
exactly.
those reps.
Yeah, it's keeping the reps up, and audiobooks are great. My husband and I, Samuel, we decided a while ago that we were going to make the bedroom a mobile phone free zone. You know, we were really investing in sleep, and so our phones are now in different rooms of the house. But we have a Amazon Alexa in the room, and we may have an audiobook being read to us as we drift off
Wow.
to sleep. So we might say,
Is that Paddington Bears or is that Roald
well,
Dahl?
funny you say that, but we've just started the Narnia series, so there is a theme going on here.
Nice.
Or the Harry Potter series, or something like that. Something that's incredibly well written, and something just, say, okay, switch off after an hour. And we might have read our own books, then turn to an Alexa and just say, play for an hour. And we just drift away to, some subtle tones. We tried it with Game of Thrones, but we kept waking up in really violent, sweary moments about 2 o'clock in the morning, thinking, what the hell's, so, or a very saucy moment on
Yeah,
Game of
not exactly a
Thrones. So,
parasympathetic story there.
no, not exactly. Yeah, it's not quite Paddington Bear.
Yeah.
Well, Paddington Bear with more boobs and dragons, I suppose. But
Yeah.
it's that idea. But again, Cody, this sense of keeping the reps up and just listening. The more you listen to, the more you hear, the more you read, the more you sap in. You automatically start to bolster your vocab. And the great thing with an Alexa, if you find a word you're not familiar with, you can just ask her to define it for you, and you get the definition live in the moment. And then as your head hits the pillow, you absorb loads of stuff. So return to stories, grab your favorite book that you have when you were a child. And probably a great question to ask you two. Did you have a favorite children's book? Was it Dr. Zeus or what was it, Barry?
I remember. I think I was watching a lot of nature documentaries when I was a kid.
Great. There
Mm.
we are. Cody,
Yeah,
what?
so not a lot of vocabulary there, just lions biting necks, things like that.
Raw. Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah.
Roar. Yep. The as before we just continue to drip a bunch of just tactical applications here, I'm zapped back to something you said about halfway through this when you described we have to know why we're here if it's not going to be an email. And one of the questions that I have for you is what are some of the unexpected benefits of people actually paying attention to this stuff, both with respect to a presentation, one-to-one or one-to-many, and even just in their day-to-day life? What are some of the things most people are not expecting they're going to gain from making some of these small improvements?
I think people are always surprised that if they sit in a very well structured and delivered presentation, they're going to learn something. I think in any workspace, we are so used to again, the slings and arrows of relentless meetings and people speaking at us, and we're not quite sure why we're here. The speaker doesn't know why they're here. So to actually learn something and to be moved emotionally, to move from one state to the other. So something has happened to you as you sat down to listen, to as you stand up to leave the room, you have moved in one sense. You've either learned something, or you've been moved by a story, or you've picked up on something that somebody said in the sense of, I've never heard that word used in that way before. I've never heard that metaphor used in that way before. I've never seen somebody construct a presentation deck like this before. Learning and moving from one state to the other is something that's usually quite unexpected from people. And if you sit in a very drab corporate presentation where the speaker is not sure why they're there, and their PowerPoint deck is pumped full of words on the screen, it becomes a very redundant exercise very quickly.
Horrible.
Yeah, it is, because all that happens is you see words on the screen, you start to read them. You give your speaker half of your focus.
Attention.
Yeah, exactly. And I always say, if there's loads of words on there, give it to me as a handout. I'll read it on the way home.
So what it sounds like you're describing is learning this stuff, you can more effectively change the world.
Exactly. Of course.
Certainly the person.
Yeah, exactly right. Yeah, and just see what happens. Grab what you can, listen, learn, and take that with you.
We probably should have asked this first, but what are some critical mistakes that interviewers are making that you think they should stop doing, or that you think they should start focusing more on instead of what they might commonly do?
Yeah, I think, and again, that's a really good question because anything with the corporate umbrella over it means that they're usually so baked in the way that things have always been done. We will always ask you, where do you see yourself in 5 years' time? We'll always ask you, what's two big challenges you had at work? What's the biggest weakness?
I
And I
might
think,
add a dimension. In addition to interviewer, I think any consultant listening to this that's worth their weight in salt and doing a good job in consultancy early on before they've enrolled a client or even during is also an interviewer. And so I want to create that frame as
yeah,
well.
exactly. Yeah, that's a good interjection. This sense of what have you learned over the past 4 years that has made you think about work or life in a slightly different way? What was that one book that you read that made you look at life slightly differently? What happened in this instance that has made you move from one state to the other? These are much more deeper questions to ask as opposed to the superficial, talk me through that project that didn't quite come in on budget, what happened there? Okay, these are important things, of course they are, and they're perhaps ones to pick up in a second interview. But in the first one, if you can see how somebody responds to learning or responds to their mistakes and successes in a different way that's away from the corporate grayness of that level of questioning, it makes it more human. And we react, humans react to humans. We react to experiences and to connections. So to ask questions that aren't stitched in that particular fashion is very unhuman-like and unrelationship-like, and it's very difficult for us to get a footing into that conversation. You get a much better square of a person with how they approach those particular points, Again, sort of
Oh,
starting and saying, what does your week look like when you're not at work? Talk me through what happens between the hours of 5 and 10 in the evening. What happened? Do you go to the gym?
it's going to be revelatory for both of you, won't it? If you're asking a question around what happens on the weekends or what are some of the biggest takeaways from the last 4 years and how you do things differently, something's going to stand out to that person,
Of
for better or
course,
for worse. And
in a
it's going to
much
help them.
more,
It's going to help you, eh?
of course, in a much more reverential way than it would do than we work out that they're an expert at Excel, okay, which is, it's a fine skill to have. But in these early days, it would be great to know what makes this person tick, okay? Do we see this person as a very good administrator, but actually they're very personable. I could see them moving into a more client-facing role pretty swiftly, or they've got a bit more, they've got other things going on in their life apart from work. They are also incredibly motivated in the way they work out. They are pushing the way they approach things physically. This idea. So they understand endurance. They understand keeping the reps up. They are disciplined because every morning they go to the gym between the hours of 6 and 7 a.m. That type of person is of greater interest, and that's a greater level of depth of questioning to ask.
Yeah, well, it's of greater interest to the person who wants to learn about this person, and I also imagine it's more interesting for the person to talk about.
Hmm.
Potentially vulnerable and uncomfortable in some cases, but certainly more of the meat as you described it.
Exactly. But great things happen from a point of exposure and vulnerability. Great stories happen from here. That's why we always spend a lot of time in my sessions how we're standing, posture, just feel relaxed. Could you maintain this posture for about 95% of the day? Because this just beams out, listen to me, something's going to happen. Listen, let's have a chat. Great things happen from here. Nothing good happens from a closed down persona. Everything's locked down. And this is not particularly interesting. I like to react to people. People like to be reacted with.
If we are going to leave people with some tools that they might use today, I have a couple that have stuck with me for years since you and I first worked together, and I know that Cody probably has a point of interest he's curious about. There are two things that I will remember for the rest of my life that you shared with me. The first one is consonants will save your bacon.
Oh, yeah.
Tell us about the bacon
Yeah.
saving power of consonants?
Okay, yeah. So a consonant will always help stabilize your sentences. If we think that vowels give a word their color, it's usually only a consonant that gives a word its meaning.
Miles, for those who have been out of school for some time, remind us, which are the vowels, which are the consonants?
A, E, I, O, U are the vowels, and the consonants are everything else.
Oh, you're not going to list them.
No, not we haven't got to. I'll be sitting there going,
Yeah. Good luck.
yeah, I have
That's
to
right.
cut this bit. So yes, that idea, and again, thinking about vowels for volume, consonants for clarity. Okay, a consonant always helps stabilize your sentences. It makes you much more on voice. You can be much more secure in what you're saying and what your sentences are doing by honing in. And it was the final consonants that you and I would have talked about, Larry, in those early days. So finishing your words.
Yep. Yeah,
Making
that's
sure
another point that bleeds into that I wanted to talk about. But to be clear here, anytime someone is moving through their sentences, the consonants will create the clarity and the structure. And if they're ever unsure about how to pronounce or finish a sentence or any string of words, allow themselves to punctuate or to emphasize the consonants in their words and their phrases.
exactly right. Yeah, because to not do so is at your detriment.
Mhm.
To not
Okay.
be acutely aware that consonants are life-saving. And it's
Via
mainly,
bacon.
yeah, the bacon. Yeah,
Via
exactly.
bacon. Yeah.
It's mainly so you can be heard.
Mm.
That basic point of speech and diction, can I be heard? That
Yeah.
most basic question that nobody asks themselves.
I
Can
remember
I be
hearing
heard?
once. I remember hearing once that consonants actually carry the most of the information in speech and in language. And I tested this for myself, and I took all of this is I actually did this for better or for worse. I wrote out a sentence and I took out all of the vowels, and you still know exactly what's being
Yeah,
said
exactly.
because all of the information is in the consonants. So for people to bleed over those and to slur them really is to the detriment of the speaker and the listener.
Exactly. That's why you find I taught in the secondary school a long time ago, and it wasn't a particularly great secondary school, high school for you guys. It wasn't a particularly great school. Okay, so the pupils' attention to how they would deliver a line or just speak normally was a real challenge for them. So I sort of spoke about everything was sort of down here because there's nothing going on. Social media means I can just text my friends. I haven't got to say anything. You know what's going on. So it's all sort of down here. So they would fall into the trap of doing 1, 2, 3, but they would say 1, 2, 3, 3, 3. And if you think about reconstructing the word three takes some effort. Three. I can stay here all day and there's no effort at all. No one can hear me, but I can stay there. So it's those types of ideas and clipping your final consonants to finish your words,
Yeah.
and words will have the fine effects of slowing down the pace and varying the pace of your delivery because you're processing every single word and clipping those final consonants. I'm finishing the word. I take my mind back to my choir master from university. We were doing a production of My Fair Lady. We were doing a rehearsal. People weren't leaving the stage quick enough. One person was left on stage between a scene change, and he just stood there and he said, "Don't just stand there like a wet fart." And hitting those T's, God, he cleared off stage immensely quickly. Okay, so it's that idea. And again, if you think about the most strictest of tutors and teachers you would have had at school, even the quietest ones could fill you with fear just by going, "Get out
Yeah, it's
now."
true. Wow.
Clip, clip, clip. So yeah, consonants will always save your bacon. So to not vocalize them is to do you a massive disservice.
The second one that I remember is in this sea of authoritative silence that you've described. I had the habit, and still have to some degree, the habit of letting the ends of my sentences die and softly bleed into either nothing or the next thing that I was going to say. And you pointed that out, and I would love for you to walk us through that because I think it's a common habit. Since you pointed it out, I can't unsee it in myself and others.
Good. This is good. So yeah, this is the famous act of people dying off at the end of thoughts. or sentences. When I say thoughts, I always mean sentences. So dying off as you come to the period at the end of that sentence. So this is really good. I encourage you all to watch and listen to the show tomorrow. People lose the energy as they get to the end, which means that they've got to work twice as hard for the start of that next sentence to then bring everything back up again to continue the story and keep it going. Yeah, it's like a mountain range, okay? I want a nice crescendo to get to the end of that sentence, the end of that thought, the end of that period, keeping the energy flowing up until the end so you can be heard. And this is really important. I cannot wait to see you all tomorrow. Thank you so much and good night. Otherwise, it's thank you so much. Great to be here. See you all tomorrow. Thanks very much. Good night.
Yep.
People sort of
Never again.
swallow the words. And Larry, you and I spoke about this, keeping the words and the sound very close to your chest, as opposed to just pushing the sound out there. Where do you want it to land? If it's a big hall, do you want your words to hit the exit sign at the back of the gym hall or wherever? Give them a direction. Your phrases have got to have a direction. It's got to have a narrative journey. Otherwise, you're running the risk of speaking for the sake of speaking. And that is not where we want to be.
Very helpful.
Do you notice that people who start to practice this fall into the habit of finishing with up talk?
Like an upward inflection at the end.
Yeah, so they turn their statements into a question?
Question? Yeah. Yeah, exactly right. Yeah. I'm going out to buy some eggs. And you think, well, are you or aren't you? Yeah, it's people sometimes do that. And then we have to make sure that we go, okay, right. So it's not a question, it's a period. And you're going to this point, you're building up this crescendo to end that thought. Okay. So sometimes we might start very silently and go, once upon a time, there were 3 bears and they all lived in the woods. And you might give it to somewhere to go, vocally, somewhere to go, and make it more statement-like. And again, thinking about these natural and usual regular places and the rules and regulations of punctuation or grammar, which again, people have either forgotten or they've become so inflicted with reality shows, potentially, where the habit of having an upward inflection is quite strong, to put it diplomatically. So that sense is there. But yes, it drives me crazy as well, Larry. It drives me out the wall because you think it's not a question. What's going on here? What's the question? Are you not going to get eggs? What's happening? You know.
Yep. Is there another piece of advice that, if you had to provide, would be the one thing that people should take away and start doing today and forever if they were going to give themselves a fighting chance at being a categorically better speaker?
Read more poetry, speak it out loud.
Okay.
Yeah, that's seriously what I would do, or just read more generally. You know, the question I get a lot from a new client, if I'm on a new business call, I really want to increase my vocabulary. And I'll go, great, what are you reading at the moment? Oh, I'm not reading anything. I go, okay, right. So we've got to do some stuff here.
Yeah. Scrolling Instagram counts as reading, right?
Scrolling Twitter. Oh, sorry, X. Yeah, that's got to be the thing to do.
Right.
So yes, encouraging that. Also, I think just to expand that slightly further, encouraging a slight sense of solitude and just taking yourself away from everywhere and leaving your phone in another room and just sitting in a chair and reading a book for half an hour, 20 minutes, something like that. There's the great example of a non-negotiable in a morning, wake up, go for a walk, come back, read a magazine article or read a chapter of a book, read a paragraph of a book, delay picking up the phone, that sense of delayed pickup. Because we all know as soon as we wake up in the morning, we touch our phone, it's then, stuck to our hands for the rest of the day until we have to rip it away to go to bed. So if we can delay that and just sit with our own thoughts and explore language and words and something that we haven't read before. And it's, the great things with poetry or literature or even old movies, whatever, is when you see somebody on screen or in a story or in a poem that's having the same experience you've had or the same trial or tribulation that you're having right now. Somebody who wrote something 150 years ago is having exactly the same issue that you have. It again reacquaints you with the sort of fabric of time and civilization, that you're part of it, and you suddenly go, actually, you know what? Life is manageable. I can get through this board meeting. I can get through this new biz meeting now.
This guy got through his village being burned. I can get through this board meeting.
Oh, I mean, come on. Yeah, exactly. You're 19 years old and you're flying a Spitfire around the shores of Dover. You're going to be absolutely fine.
You're gonna be fine. Well, Myles, I'm sure that everyone else here is thinking what I'm thinking, which is I want to find random old ladies, walk up to them and say, I love your coat.
Yeah, and then chase them down the road. Exactly
That's
right.
I want to make sure that everyone here who wants to find you knows how. Working with you, even for a short period of time, was immeasurably worthwhile. I know that would be true for anyone else who chose to do so, and I want to know, where should people go?
Thank you very much. You can find me on Instagram. I'm at Speakwell Coaching, or you can find me on LinkedIn. Full name, Myles Usher Doyle. That's Myles with a Y, Myles. I'm on there as well.
Make sure that we link those so that people can find them.
You're a star. Thank you so much, gents. It's been a real pleasure.
Thanks so much for the chat, Myles.
I hope you enjoyed that episode of the Active Life podcast. If you did, please head to wherever you listen and leave us that 5-star rating. It really does go a long way. 5 stars goes a long way. Please leave them. If you're interested in working with us as a coach, remember, we help coaches from around the world build fulfilling careers, working with clients they're inspired to help so they never have to worry about being able to pay your bills again. No one's ever going to ask you if you are going to get a real job when you work with Active Life. All you have to do, head into the show notes, click the link that you find there, download our curriculum. That will give you a feel for what it is going to take for you to be successful. A team member of ours will reach out to you to find out if it's a fit for us to work together. Till the next show, turn pro.